Exactly.
Under a tree.
Yeah,
It's amazing.
it is, yeah,
Out in the
yeah,
street.
but it's huge.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
It's-
Well, I gotta go find the, I know.
Oh, here, do you want me to
I
send that in the
mailed,
box?
I mailed my,
It's there.
I brought my,
It is there.
I brought my,
Thank you.
my money last week, I was all ready to go, and the box wasn't out there when I first came.
Oh,
So I forgot, and then I went home with it, so I put it in the mail.
oh,
I thought, I'm not waiting until next Sunday, they
right.
need it now,
Immediately.
immediately.
Why don't you just wait till you?
Happy
So
to-
good to have you back.
Thank you. I'm happy to be back. Excited to be back.
What do I have? I have no version of it, it's not real for some reason.
What?
Nothing, I'm thinking. Why don't I sit up there instead, but
Were you my
Okay.
display?
I am.
Yeah.
Yeah.
we got communion today, don't we?
We do. They
I
great.
think I'm gonna get one of those since I can't stay.
Oh.
Well, it's good to see you too. I'm gonna have to watch you because Michael has to leave after
That's
Sunday school.
That works. Yeah.
I know, I have one week.
We're only talking about how to get into heaven, so no big deal.
Have I been wrong?
Exactly.
I'm
Did I
gonna
miss
have
it?
to-
Yeah, no.
Yeah.
I was telling her.
She said she has to leave early, so you're only missing. how to
It's
get in
because
heaven.
of them.
Oh, wow.
Pagan fakes.
It's all your fault.
Well, next week it's how to get into the other place. I guess you can be there for that.
Oh.
I didn't see that. That was all in.
Okay, I'm gonna go get a program for you again.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, don't put us in for too much trouble. Yeah.
That's okay. Oh, I'm thirsty today.
Me too. All right, so he's actually already started it. It is live. It's been live for 2 minutes.
Well, let's see. Okay.
Oh, yes, actually, we are live.
Oh, we're live.
Here comes
I'm
Johnny.
trying to cross it.
Yes.
Good morning.
Hi,
Good
Brian.
morning.
How are you?
I wanted to ask you, because I've been thinking about her a lot, how is Taylor doing?
She is hanging in there.
Oh,
Yeah.
that does not sound good.
Well, she went to the doctor Friday, so we're waiting to get her approval for the chemo. So she's still waiting on that.
She hasn't had the chemo?
No.
Oh,
You
God.
mean your daughter?
Yes.
Oh, yeah, I think, yeah.
Oh, my gosh.
Yes.
I just assumed she had, I knew it was kind of
Yeah.
mixed
So
up
we're
because
still
of
waiting
the
on that.
surgery, but
So she's been in quite a bit of pain waiting for that. So we've been on pins and needles.
That's not good.
I'll be praying.
Yeah, thank you.
For some reason, she's just been on my mind and I just was like.
Yeah. We're
Yeah.
hoping that will happen very soon.
And Josh,
Yeah, he's
is
hanging
he
in
still
there.
looking for a job?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Yes, she's in California. Yeah.
Oh, she's in California.
Yeah.
Her and Kara?
Yep.
Oh.
For life.
Yes, we are.
We're live.
Yeah. Sergio actually started us like 3 minutes ago.
Oh,
We're switching to YouTube today.
Oh, YouTube.
So we're now streaming through YouTube. And I think the main reason is because Facebook has changed their storage policies. So you can't have things for more than 30 days.
Oh, yeah, my daughter.
So- So anyway,
So church is on YouTube too then?
yes. Now, he's gonna be linking it into Facebook, so it can still be found there, but it's gonna be posted in YouTube. That's what I understand.
Interesting.
Yes,
That's good information.
yes.
Yeah.
So I guess it's time to start. Since we
Can I ask a
have,
clarifying question that's probably good to have on here?
yes.
Do we start at 9 or 9:10?
Well, that's a great question.
She had just gotten
Uh,
back from California. She thought-
According to the bulletin, we start at 9.
Yes, I noticed that recently.
But during COVID, we started at 9:10 because that gave time for people to get seated and for the streaming to get set up and everything like that. There
Okay.
was some issue with starting at 9 o'clock straight up, I think maybe because there was interruptions with people coming in. So what has happened is that people have gotten used to 9:10.
Yes, I started driving at
And,
Oh, is it 9
and
o'clock
so,
now?
so, no, it's 9:12 now.
9. Yeah.
So in practical terms, it's 9:10. It probably makes sense to push it back to 9 o'clock.
Okay.
Although, again, with the streaming, it's hard to start the streaming straight at 9 o'clock because if people are coming in at 9 o'clock, there's lots of interruptions.
Okay.
So,
My goal was to start us off kind of an out Costello.
yeah, absolutely. Well, come on up.
Yeah. Is it 9 or 9:10?
Right. Well, we are in Ezekiel. Last week we did a flyby overview of the entire book. Right? I know Lynn absolutely loves that book. No? There's some really neat things about Ezekiel.
Yeah, there is.
We're going to be looking at chapter 1 today. I hope to make it all the way through chapter 1, but there's a lot that is packed in there.
Yeah, there is.
One of the things that's interesting about this is there are a lot of parallels in what Ezekiel sees to what you find in John's Revelation, Isaiah, when he's viewing the heavens. And you really get to see the glory of God. And that's kind of the point with this. Ezekiel is also interesting in that he is very, very specific. Like when he talks about dates and times, when he talks about details, he has much more information than almost any other prophet in the Bible. And we see this even in the opening verses of Ezekiel. I'm actually just going to read through Ezekiel chapter 1, and then we'll take some time and walk through it as we look at this. In Ezekiel, it begins in chapter 1, verse 1, in the 30th year, in the 4th month, on the 5th day of the month. So we're getting real specific here. As I was among the exiles by the Chebar Canal, the heavens were opened, and I saw visions of God. On the 5th day of the month, it was the 5th year of the exile of King Jehoiachin. The word of the Lord came to Ezekiel the priest, the son of Buzi, in the land of the Chaldeans by the Chebar Canal, and the hand of the Lord was upon him there. As I looked, behold, a stormy wind came out of the north, and a great cloud with brightness around it, and fire flashing forth continually. And in the midst of the fire, as it were, gleaming metal. And from the midst of it came the likeness of 4 living creatures. And this was their appearance. They had a human likeness, but each had 4 faces, and each of them had 4 wings. Their legs were straight, and the soles of their feet were like the sole of a calf's foot. And they sparkled like burnished bronze. Under their wings, on their 4 sides, they had human hands, and the 4 had their faces and their wings thus. Their wings touched one another. Each one of them went straight forward without turning as they went. As for the likeness of their faces, each had a human face. The 4 had the face of a lion on the right side, the 4 had the face of an ox on the left side, and the 4 had the face of an eagle. Such were their faces, and their wings were spread out above. Each creature had 2 wings, each of which touched the wing of another, while 2 covered their bodies. And each went straight forward. Wherever the Spirit would go, they went, without turning as they went. As for the likeness of the living creatures, their appearance was like burning coals of fire, like the appearance of torches moving to and fro among the living creatures. And the fire was bright, and out of the fire went forth lightning, And the living creatures darted to and fro like the appearance of a flash of lightning. Now as I looked at the living creatures, I saw a wheel on the earth beside the living creatures, one for each of the four of them. As for the appearance of the wheels and their construction, their appearance was like the gleaming of beryl. And the four had the same likeness, their appearance and construction being, as it were, a wheel within a wheel. When they went in any of their four directions without turning as they went. And their rims were tall and awesome. And the rims of all four were full of eyes all around. And when the living creatures went, the wheels went beside them. And when the living creatures rose from the earth, the wheels rose. Wherever the Spirit wanted to go, they went. And the wheels rose along with them, for the spirit of the living creatures was in the wheels. When those went, these went. And when those stood, those stood. And when those rose from the earth, the wheels rose along with them, for the spirit of the living creatures was in the wheels. Over the heads of the living creatures, there was the likeness of an expanse, shining like awe-inspiring crystals spread out above their heads. And under the expanse, their wings were stretched out straight, one toward another. And each creature had 2 wings covering its body. And when they went, I heard the sound of their wings like the sound of many waters, like the sound of the Almighty, a sound of tumult, like the sound of an army. When they stood still, they let down their wings. And there came a voice from above the expanse over their heads. When they stood still, they let down their wings. And above the expanse over their heads, there was the likeness of a throne, in appearance like a sapphire, and seated above the likeness of a throne was a likeness of a human appearance. And upward from what had the appearance of his waist, I saw as it were gleaming metal, like the appearance of fire enclosed all around. And downward from what had the appearance of his waist, I saw as it were the appearance of fire, and there was brightness around him, like the appearance of the bow that is in the cloud on the day of rain. So was the appearance of the brightness all around. Such was the appearance of the likeness of the glory of the Lord. And when I saw it, I fell on my face, and I heard the voice of one speaking. Ezekiel chapter 1. Wow.
Wow.
So,
You might need a week, a couple more.
yeah, to go through all this.
That
Absolutely, there's a lot in there.
That is a lot.
Right.
I noticed it went over a couple pages.
So here's the important question. Now that I've read that, you guys all have a very clear picture of what Ezekiel saw, right?
Yeah, wings and 2 wings and. Holy
Look
cow.
at those eyes, where are all the eyes?
How do we decipher this, right? I mean, if you wanted to, you could look up different artists' interpretation of what this looks like. And every artist's interpretation is different. I mean, unless they copied another artist, because what we're hearing, what I read here, what you read when you see this, it's beyond human expression. It really strikes me as I read through this. There's this phrase that keeps recurring over and over and over again that Ezekiel uses. And the phrase is the likeness or the appearance of, right? Because he's trying.
Paul put out a picture one time when we were doing Daniel, I think, about the one with the angels and the wings. As I can remember, almost picturing it, would have a human face, but the wings were, ones were this way and some were still back there, so.
Yeah, now when you
I
look
don't know
at
where he got the picture.
when you look at the Revelation of John, John describes creatures very similar, but they have 6 wings. They've got wings to fly with, wings they wrap their body, and also wings to cover their
Their
feet,
feet,
right?
yeah.
And we have the term seraphim
There.
for those. Seraph actually means foot. So if you've ever heard like fonts that are called serif fonts or sans serif, right? Sans means without. This is actually, I don't have a pen, so my pens are gone. But if you think about like a letter T, but you know the ones where it kind of has these down here,
Yeah,
those are called serifs,
oh.
feet. And so a letter T without those, like a straight line, is a sans serif font, just means without feet. But that's a connection, like when we talk about seraphim, the angelic creatures, it's because they have feet, or their feet are covered, wings on their feet. These angelic beings would be referred to as cherubim. And here's an interesting connection. Like we talked about last week, Ezekiel, what was his profession? He was a priest, right? And if you think about the descriptions we have of the temple, or if you go back into Deuteronomy and you see descriptions of the tabernacle that was built under Moses, one of the motifs that is all over the place, starting with the Ark of the Covenant. What's on top of the Ark? Cherubim, yeah, angels. And they're described as their wings touching each other. You see the connection with what we just read?
Yeah.
Right. So this motif, this cherubim, it was woven into the curtain that separated the Holy of Holies from the holy place. It was in the architecture, right? When you read about the description of Solomon's temple in particular, cherubim, cherubim, cherubim. This would have been what Ezekiel grew up with. Right? Because he was trained to be a priest. He was in Jerusalem until he was carried off into captivity at the age of 25. So he would be very familiar with the concept of a cherubim. It probably blew his mind to actually see real cherubim.
He was 25, same time as Daniel.
No, Daniel, so if you remember when we looked at Daniel, there were 3 times Jerusalem was attacked. Okay. The first, the nobility was carried away. Daniel was in that. The second time, all of the workers and the royalty were carried away. That was with Ezekiel. And then the third time, the temple was destroyed. Because of course they kept having these uprisings, and Nebuchadnezzar was like, enough, we're done. Right? So what we have here with Ezekiel, the temple still stands at this point, where we are with chapter 1. We'll find out later, because Ezekiel is going to meet a messenger from Jerusalem, and that's when Ezekiel gets the news that the temple's been destroyed. Right? But for right now, the temple is still standing when he hears this. Actually, let's talk about this, because we at the very beginning of the chapter, it begins with the phrase, in the 30th year. And there's some question about what exactly is the 30th year. What the 30th year of what? Well, we know because he says a few phrases later in verse 2, on the 5th day of the month, it was the 5th year of the exile of King Jehoiachin. Right? So this 30th year is also 5 years after he had been taken into captivity. And he was 25 years old when he was taken into captivity. So this is potentially Ezekiel's 30th year, right? 30 years old. That's one possibility. Others make the 30th year to be from the beginning of the reign of Nabopolassar, the father of Nebuchadnezzar, from which the Chaldeans began a new computation of time. Right? So it used to be that every time there was a king, the calendar would start over. You see that a lot when you read like the Chronicles and the Kings, right? In the 1st year or in the 7th year of such and such king. That was pretty common. So it could be the 30th year of Nabopolassar. Nabopolassar reigned 19 years, and this was the 11th of his son, Nebuchadnezzar, right? Which makes 30. So that's a possibility. And it would make sense for Ezekiel, since he was in Babylon, to use the computation they would use. Just like when we're in foreign countries, we date by the new style. And then afterward, he uses the computation of his own country, which is the 5th year of Jehoiachin's captivity, right? So it's the 30th year, because we're in Babylon, it's the 30th year of Babylon. That, by the way, is the 5th year of Jehoiachin. So that's a possibility. That could be what the 30th year is referring to. And then this was interesting. I got this from one of the commentaries. By the Chaldee paraphrase, but the Chaldee paraphrase fixes upon another era and says that this was the 30th year after Hilkiah the priest found the book of the law in the house of the sanctuary at midnight after the setting of the moon in the days of Josiah the king. And it is true, this was just 30 years from that time. And that was an event so remarkable, as it put the Jewish state upon a new trial, that it was proper enough to date from it. And perhaps, therefore, the prophet speaks indefinitely of 30 years, as having an eye both on that event and to the Chaldean computation, which were coincident. So in other words, he might be referring to all of them. It's 30 years from the discovery or rediscovery of the law under King Josiah. It's 30 years from using the Chaldean calendar, right? And it just so happens I'm also 30 years old. But this tells us something about Ezekiel. Because if you remember with Josiah, what was the big deal about the discovery of the law?
Well, they repented.
There was a massive repentance. Josiah was one of the somewhat good kings, right? He brought all kinds of reform. And if that was the same year that Ezekiel was born, it would have meant that at least for his early years, Ezekiel would have been part of that. He would have seen, grown up, particularly as a priest in Jerusalem. Ezekiel, though, would have also been under the wicked kings as he got into his teen and 20s. And then here he is in captivity. He would have seen it all, the whole gamut.
When you work with people, you give them names. And Ezekiel is what's called a detail-oriented person,
Yes,
very detailed.
very detailed, absolutely. Yeah, I think right before you got here, I mentioned that when you look at Ezekiel compared to the other prophets of the time, he has way more information that he puts in. Now, there's also details that are perhaps missing, like we talked about, that when John talks about the angelic creatures around the throne, there's 6 wings he describes, and we only see 4. But some of the commentators talk about this. A lot of this has to do with perspective. What are you looking at? What do you see? And he may just not have noticed. He's looking down. Whoa, what big wheels. Really big wheels. Tall and awesome. Those are Ezekiel's words. And covered with eyes. What do you do with that stuff? Right?
Can I say something? When we do science fiction, they always draw these odd, weird creatures. But these were human-like creatures in God's heaven.
Yeah.
If we're not gonna be so odd, human.
Yeah, I mean, when you look at this, we have to understand that the phrase, as I mentioned, we see repeated over and over and over again through chapter 1 is a likeness, right? So he's trying to put into words what he's seen. And even things like, I like the description where he talks about from the likeness of where his belt would be. And just the way that it's phrased there, it's really clear. It's almost like, yeah, here we go. And upward from what had the appearance of his waist,
Right.
I saw, as it were, gleaming metal, like the appearance of fire enclosed all around. And downward from what had the appearance of his waist, I saw, as it were, the appearance of fire. And there was brightness all around you. And so what he's saying is, it wasn't fire. It was like fire. That's the closest thing I have to describe it. It wasn't burnished metal. It was like burnished metal. So he's kind of grasping at that. Even when you look at like the descriptions, and artists will try to draw these cherubim with 4 faces, right? You got the human face, the ox face, the lion face, and the eagle face. But he doesn't actually say that. What he says is that they have a face like a human. And then for the likeness of their faces, each had a human face, period. And then it goes on and said, the 4 had the face of a lion on the right side, the face of an ox on the left side, and the face of an eagle. Well, but they have a face of a human. I mean, how do you do that, right? I've talked about this before. There's a mathematician who was also a pastor in the late 19th century. And he wrote this book called Flatland. And I highly recommend it. It's a really interesting book. It's very short. And what he does, this is as a mathematician, is he creates this world where all of the creatures that live in this world are 2-dimensional. And at one point, one of the 2-dimensional creatures is visited by a 3-dimensional creature. And so, of course, his perspective is in 2 dimensions. And so he can't figure out this 3-dimensional creature. It doesn't make sense. That the 3-dimensional creature is described as a sphere. But if you think about a sphere that passes through a plane, it's invisible if it's outside the plane. It's a dot, just the top of the sphere is in the plane. And it gets bigger, but its appearance is a circle. As it passes through the plane, it gets bigger, and then it shrinks again, and then disappears. Can you imagine that? A sphere passing through a plane? So from the perspective of being in the plane, you don't understand a sphere. It's the appearance of, like the words we have here, a circle that can change its shape and disappear entirely. That's kind of what we're dealing with here. Ezekiel's dealing with something, and he's trying to use our perspective to explain it, but it's going to be incomplete. It's going to look really strange when we read it because it's beyond us. And that's why we see that phrase repeated so much, the appearance of, like, as. It's metaphorical language that he's using here. But we can pick out some interesting details as we look at this. For example, well, let's finish the setting before we jump into that. All right, so we know this is the 30th year, and there's several reasons or ways that the 30th year can be interpreted. But we also know specifically what the time period is because he tells us it's the 5th year of the exile of King Jehoiachin. Right. So what this means is that if Ezekiel were 30 years old in 593, he would have been born in 622 during the reign of King Josiah. About 600, when he was some 23 years of age, he got married. And with his wife, he went into Babylonia as an exile in 597. The 597 date might ring a bell when we talk about the dates in Daniel. 597. The last dated prophecy of his book, which is Ezekiel 29:17, is that of the year 571, when he would have been 51. Meanwhile, he would have lost his wife when he was 37. That's in Ezekiel 24. So that just gives you some of the time frame of Ezekiel. Now, we don't know what happened to him, if he died in exile, but because his last prophecy is about 51 years old. So just very quickly, dates again, we've talked about these before. 605 BC, Jerusalem was attacked. Daniel and other captives were taken to Babylon. 597 BC, Jerusalem was attacked, treasure taken from the temple, and more captives taken to Babylon. And this would have been when Ezekiel was taken. 587, so 10 years later, Jerusalem falls, and almost everyone remaining in the kingdom was exiled. The other thing we see is that Daniel describes his position. I was among the exiles by the Chebar Canal. It makes me think of, was it Psalm 137? By the rivers of Babylon. Right? And of course we have that famous song, Boney M. They didn't actually come up with it. It was another group, but their cover is probably the one that's most well known. By the rivers of Babylon, where we sat down, there we wept as we remembered Zion. And you kind of have a sense of that here from Ezekiel, right? When he refers to them as the exiles by this canal. Some of the other interesting things here is it talks about how the heavens were opened. You think about the phrasing of that. The way that it's described is it's as somebody went and opened them.
Opened them so that it could be seen?
So Ezekiel could see,
Oh,
right? So you have this sense that Ezekiel is there. He's with the exiles as he describes, and as he's watching, it's like somebody ripped open the sky to show him greater realities. We talked about this a little bit last week, that one of the things that God does repeatedly is he talks about greater realities. You know, we're stuck in our perspective here. And there's times where God says, look up, look around you. Here, there's more to see. Your perspective is so limited. Remember how we talked about the difference between paradox and just lost the word, contradiction, right? That a paradox is an apparent contradiction, but a lot of times when you have more information, all of a sudden it makes sense. Oh, that does work. Perspective. And then it goes further to say, we know who Ezekiel is, the son of Buzi, in the land of the Chaldeans by the Chebar Canal. That's repeated, so where we're at. And then it ends with, and the hand of the Lord was upon him there. How frightening. The hand of the Lord was on him. One of the things that we see when we talk about Ezekiel and what he's describing here is he's really going into the glory of God. The phrases that he uses in the descriptive language is about the greatness of God. Why is that such a big deal? Where is he?
He's away from the temple away from Jerusalem.
Yeah, and why? Why is he there? What just happened to his land? Who won?
Babylon.
Babylon, right? So how do you think that makes you feel?
So it's a picture of kind of, I don't know, to me, they would be hopeless.
Hopeless?
You know, there's some of the phrases in Psalms kind of gives me that,
Yeah,
you know, that the exiles, you know, how could the captors asked them, told them to sing. You
right.
know, and how can I sing? It's almost like when somebody dies.
Yeah,
And you wonder, well, how does the sun keep on shining and life go on? When this big horrendous thing has happened, talk about a narrow perspective then.
right.
You know, and that's where they would be. They would
Right.
be in that narrowness, but,
You kind of go into tunnel vision,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
You lose perspective
yeah.
because,
But I don't know, he was so gracious there.
Yeah.
To, give even one a glimpse, I brought this about, but I had warned you, but what else did he tell them when
Yeah.
he told them about the curses? Was that he would turn his back on them, but he would not forsake them.
yeah, absolutely. What we have, as you're describing it, going forward, of course, is this idea that God has not forsaken them. But they have been put into exile. Their country has been taken over. They are under somebody else's rule. When you read about the events of that time, even outside of the Bible, when you read about what Greece did and Rome did and Persia did, those touch on the Bible, but you can also read the descriptions outside of it. There was a lot of connection also with their deities, right? We won because our God was stronger than your God.
Yeah, wasn't that the taunt that they did, each surrounding, that's one of the words that they said.
Absolutely.
Where are the gods of?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So how do you think Ezekiel, as a priest, would feel in exile? Where is my God? Were the gods of Babylon actually stronger, greater, more awesome?
No.
You would have that sense. So think about that when you think about the vision that Ezekiel is seeing here and the descriptions of God. One of the things that the commentators pointed out is when you read the descriptions of these living creatures, whatever they are, let's say they're cherubim, you don't find that particular description in the iconography of any of the other foreign nations. We talked about, for example, that Babylon would have like a bull with wings in their iconography, but nothing quite like this. 4 different faces, the face of a human, but also a lion and an ox and an eagle. How does that work? And the fact that as we read this, it'd be very difficult to even draw this. It doesn't even make sense. How do you render that in artistic? I mean, I remember being introduced to the idea of a hypercube. Have you guys ever heard of a hypercube? Okay, well, you know what a cube is, right? Got 6 sides. Yeah, and it's a 3-dimensional object. Well, a hypercube is a 4-dimensional cube. What? How do you wrap your mind around that? Right? Well, that's exactly the point. Is we can kind of glimpse aspects of what a hypercube would be, but we can't really describe it because we don't see in 4 dimensions. And that's the same feeling that I get here, is that Ezekiel is trying to describe things that can't be put into our language. It's the same thing with the Trinity. The commentators talk about that as well. How do you have a being who is singular, one, but 3 persons? God the Father, God the Son, God the Holy Spirit, but one God. How's that work? You're back in Genesis, where God is basically talking to himself. Let us create man in our own image. What? Who's us? Who's our? Right? So all the way back in Genesis chapter 1 and 2, we have descriptions of this plurality somehow of a singular God, because God also makes it really, really, really clear to the early Israelites, to Abraham, Moses, there is one God. How's that work? Well, kind of the same thing here. You have one living creature, but it's got 4 faces. Okay. Or 3 faces and 1 human. I don't know how. That's not, in one sense, that's not really for us to know. But it does give us some interesting insights.
Could we kind of liken that to different characteristics?
That could be.
You know, each face is, it
Yeah.
represents, you know, a different thing.
Absolutely.
So I don't know, that's the easiest.
Yeah, and I think there is some truth to that. The commentators talk about that as well, because if you look at the animal kingdom, right, what's the lion kind of considered?
King of the jungle.
Yeah, king of the jungle or king of the beasts, right? King of the wild animals in general, if we think about that. How about an eagle?
King of the sky.
Yeah, it's the greatest bird of the sky, right? There's a reason why the eagle is the motif for many nations. I mean, we think about the United States, right? But we're not alone. The Romans did it as well. What about an ox?
Strength.
Yeah, it's kind of considered the greatest of the domesticated animals. Strength, patience, endurance. And one of the commentators even goes so far as to say that we start with a picture of a human face, because a human is the only rational animal, if you want to use that word, that we know. Right? So it would be considered the highest in that sense. But if you take each of these 3, you know, the lion, if you put a human in the jungle with a lion, who's going to win?
Yeah.
Probably the lion. I mean, unless the human
Unless
has.
you're Daniel.
Right, yeah, that's true. That's a Daniel, right? You know, and then you always hear these, you know, the dream of human beings to fly. I think of Gary Larson with a lot of his comics talking about that. But the eagle. So the lion is greater than humanity in this realm. The great eagle is greater than humanity in this realm, just like the ox is greater than humanity when it comes to the strength and the endurance that is needed to do that. And so somehow this living creature encompasses like humanity with the face, but then in greater scale in all these other areas. That's one possible way to look at it. Again, we don't really know. Ezekiel doesn't sit down and explain to us what these faces mean. He just draws these pictures out for us as we go into it. Verse 4, as I looked, behold, a stormy wind came out of the north. What would be the north? Any ideas? This one might be a little more obscure, but if you know Israel's history, the north was generally speaking where the enemies came from. So the north was where they looked to as, that's danger. Assyria, Babylonia, those would be coming down from the north. And you think about how Israel is laid out, that would be it. But this is a stormy wind, has a great cloudness with brightness and fire flashing forth continually in the midst of the fire, as it were of gleaming metal. What does that give you ideas of? Think about the Exodus. How were the Israelites led? Pillar of cloud and a pillar of fire. So there's connections there. And then you can also think of Elijah on Mount Carmel, right? With the glory of God coming down. Whirlwind, a raging fire engulfing itself. It's also a reminder of the burning bush that Moses saw, which burned but did not consume itself. Interesting descriptions right there. And then brightness all around, radiating out of its midst. Right? This brightness is an expression of the glory of God. So if you were to look at, there's three prophets that were contemporaries of each other. Ezekiel, who of course we're talking about, Daniel, and Jeremiah. And all three of these, when they describe God, actually there's also Isaiah. Isaiah would be earlier, but it says, this is one of the commentaries, if the message of Isaiah centers around the salvation of the Lord, right? And that's where we have like the suffering servant and a lot of the descriptions of the Messiah. That of Jeremiah is about the judgment of the Lord. Jeremiah, and that's why we have Jeremiah and Lamentations, lamenting the fall. Jeremiah is described as the weeping prophet, the judgment of the Lord. Daniel is about the kingdom of the Lord. Then Ezekiel is concerned with the glory of the Lord. And as we already said, glory would be such a huge deal because from the Israel perspective, Israel is fallen. All of the treasure at this point in time has been taken out of the temple. Remember, that was the treasure that the king was so proud of that he invited Babylon to come and see it all. And they were told, well, Babylon's going to come and take it all. Well, Ezekiel saw that happen. Imagine being carried off into captivity and seeing, hey, that's all the pieces of the treasury of the temple that I'm supposed to be the high priest of in 5 years, being carted off along with it. And then, as we'll find out later, they'll receive news that not only was the temple ransacked, it's now been destroyed. Where is God's glory? It's been wiped out. But Ezekiel saw the glory of God. Huge and awesome. Does God need the temple?
God's not in the building.
No. And even when you go back to Moses, when he built the tabernacle, if you remember the descriptions, it was make these copies exactly as they appear in the heavens, right? That this is the tabernacle is a copy. It's not God's actual dwelling place. It's a picture of God's dwelling place, at best. It doesn't mean it's not important, but it's a little bit like mistaking a mirror for an actual person or a photograph for the actual person. Right? The glory of God. So one of the things that most of the commentators seem to agree on is that when you look at this description, when you see the four creatures, particularly with the wheels that are associated with them, and then there's a throne above them, it's like he's describing a chariot. Because you have the Lord, you have the Almighty, you have God being transported, so to speak, accompanied with all this glory. It's not like God needs to have a chariot to move him around. But the picture here is of the awesome majesty of God. Well, last week we talked about this. Why is God in all of his glory in Babylon? Well, who's in Babylon?
People.
His
People, right? One of the things that is a recurring theme in the Old Testament when Israel goes to war is there's this idea that the gods are regional gods, right? Dagon, the king or the god of the Philistines, is an oceanic or sea god. There's that, I forget the specific reference, but there's the enemies who attack Israel, and they try different attacks because well, maybe their God is a god of the plains, and that's why we lost. Or maybe their God is a god of the mountains, and that's why we lost. There's this sense that gods are regional, but the God of Israel is not. And that's a recurring theme as well. There is the God above all gods. He happens to make his dwelling place in Israel with the temple, the chosen people. But as we see here, he's not stuck in Israel, in Jerusalem, in the temple, nor is he limited by it. Much, much bigger. All right, so we're just about out of time, but let me finish this. So four remarkable beings were notable from within this whirlwind of God's presence. Ezekiel later identified these remarkable creatures as cherubim in Ezekiel chapter 10, angels of unique power and glory surrounding God. Some try to emphasize the connection between what Ezekiel described and the artistic images of half-beast, half-human monsters of ancient cultures. Yet the biblical idea of cherubim goes back much further. Cherubim first appear in the Garden of Eden, those who guarded the way to the tree of life with a flaming sword, Genesis chapter 3. Artistic designs of cherubim were prominent on the lid to the Ark of the Covenant, the mercy seat, Exodus 25. Since the Ark of the Covenant represented the presence of God among Israel, Yahweh was sometimes called he who dwells between the cherubim. You find that in 1 Samuel 4, 2 Samuel 6, 1 Chronicles 13, Psalm 80, and Isaiah 37. This was an earthly artistic expression of a heavenly reality, which you can see references to that in Hebrews chapter 8. Sometimes the phrase speaks of the earthly picture and sometimes the heavenly reality. The interior of the tabernacle was decorated with designs of cherubim, giving the impression to anyone in the tabernacle that they were surrounded by cherubim, Exodus 26. The veil separating the most holy place of the tabernacle was decorated with cherubim, adding to the sense of their presence, Exodus 26. The designs of cherubim were prominent in Solomon's temple, 1 Kings chapter 6. The four creatures mentioned by John surrounding the throne of God are rightly thought to be cherubim, Revelation chapter 4. Before his fall, Satan was among the cherubim covering God's throne, Ezekiel 28. And then I've already mentioned this. Certainly Ezekiel was acquainted with cherubim from his training in the temple, with its many representations of these creatures. Exodus 25 and 26, 36 through 37, 1 Kings 6, and 2 Chronicles 3 are all places where we see these referenced. So the fact that we don't know exactly how they look or how they work doesn't mean that there aren't references, connections, sites you might see, you might say of them all over the place. And then finally, they had the likeness of a man. Ezekiel noted that they were not men. They were angelic beings, not human beings, yet they had the likeness of a man. In general form and structure, they looked like men. As the descriptions following will show, they were unlike any person on earth. Men don't have 4 faces and 4 wings, yet they were generally more like men than dragons or whales or other forms. When angelic beings appear to men and women in the Bible, they often have the likeness of a man. Perhaps the general form and appearance of angels is something like the general form and appearance of human beings. That was what you mentioned, Betty. All right, we are out of time, so we will continue chapter 2 later. Lynn, you were right, we couldn't finish. No, chapter 1, sorry.
Not
We're not
doing
in chapter
justice.
2. Right, not in doing justice. Okay.
They had their religious icons, so to speak, where they would, things that would make them think about God. And we do the same thing
Yeah, we
in
do.
our culture.
Yep.
We have crosses and special cathedrals are built a certain way, and we do it the same thing.
Yeah,
in
we
a
do.
different way.
Yeah, and I think the important distinction we always have to keep in mind is understanding that those symbols can point to God, but they are not God. Yeah, I remember studying how cathedrals were built, that the actual shape inside is a cross, how it's set up. And it's to draw attention to God. All the iconography.
And the old churches would always go a certain way with the steeple and
Yep.
center.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, well, let me close this in a word of prayer, and we'll continue on with our day. Heavenly Father, I thank you so much for your love and your grace for us. I pray that you will bless our time this day. Lord, I lift up to you those who are not able to be here, whether it's illness or just travel, that you keep them safe or bring health to their bodies. Bless us all in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
See if I can figure out how to stop this thing.